guys, how are we doing? Welcome back to my channel, Boomy Reactions. I am Boomy, hello. And today guys, I would like to share with you another one of Lawrence Brown's videos. So this is Lost in the Pond, and this video today is 7 myths that British people believe about America, part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1, go and check that out. So last time I reacted to part 1 of Lawrence's videos, and yes, it is funny, isn't it? The things that we have grown up believing about people in the US, or your lifestyles in the US. And I think the majority of these beliefs have been founded in watching a lot of American TV. So yeah, we all we generally think that you all live in massive houses, and that is the fault of Home Alone. So that house in Home Alone, that has led like generations of children in the UK to grow up believing that you all must live in these massive houses. Now, obviously, I think the majority of your houses, by comparison to our average house here in the UK, is generally much bigger, because if you think space-wise, obviously we're tiny, weeny little island, and any kind of land that we have here, the space, it's very sought after, so it becomes very expensive. So houses become like much more expensive than what you would get for the same amount of money in the US, because I imagine land is generally, I'm sure it differs state by state, it's generally a bit cheaper because you've got so much more land. Generally, I know, again, this is going to be different state by state, isn't it, guys? But yes, I'm trying to think far back in my memories as a child. I suppose Home Alone did it for me. That made me think that, gosh, oh my, American houses must be so big. Look how glamorous they are. Look how big they are. And, by comparison, I don't know, do all of you think that we live in a castle or somewhere like Downton Abbey, which is very, very far from the truth. But it is funny seeing the stereotypes that we've kind of grown up with. Yeah, and kind of having to think about where those stereotypes actually come from. But yes, so we do generally think that you all have these massive modern houses. I'm sure that's just one of the myths that Lawrence will bust, and we'll realize that it's just not true. So let's have a look at some more of these. And as ever, guys, if you're enjoying these reactions, please like and subscribe to the channel. So let's get on with the video, guys. I know we're doing an awful lot of talking, so let's watch Lawrence.
Yeah, we're rolling. Hello, this video is sponsored by BritBox, the premier streaming service for Britain's most beloved TV shows. I'm Lawrence Brown, and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to myths. Specifically, myths that British people like myself believe about the United States. Real fans of Lost in the Pond will know that I've already done a part 1 in this series, so I will link to that at the end. And if you want to become a real fan and you're not yet subscribed to this channel, do that now. Thanks. You see, after doing part 1 and having lived in the United States for 14 years and 12 days, I realised that there were just lots of falsehoods that I used to believe about the United States of America, thus warranting a second video. And so, without further ado, here are 7 myths that British people believe about the United States, part 2.
Part 2.
I used to have this friend when I lived in England who came from a wealthy family, and it was always the topic of conversation among people whenever we'd speak about this person that they had a swimming pool. And this was very, very unusual for Britain. But American television shows and Jack Black's Instagram page tend to give us this impression that every house in America has its own swimming pool. Yes. And this isn't even close to being true, because a lot of Americans I speak to say they can't even afford a swimming pool, but some would say that even if they could, they wouldn't want to put up with the maintenance of it, because it takes a lot to keep that thing clean and chlorified. And
that's so true. Okay, so I never thought about this, but pools must be a pain in the backside to maintain. And actually, I think the reality of having one must be a lot more work than people who don't have a pool, a lot more work than they realize. So yeah, it's virtually unheard of in the UK to have a pool on your property. I have in my lifetime seen, known, kind of not really known them personally, but there was a house party in my teens in like the posh area of where I grew up, and someone had a heated outdoor pool, but it wasn't really an outdoor. It was still in its little kind of pool house, but it was brilliant. It was amazing. They obviously had like a huge property and a massive back garden to facilitate this. Yes, so that is the only time I have ever known anyone to have a pool in a property in the UK. It's very, very uncommon. So I'm sure there are much more people that have pools in the US because, your weather's generally nicer. I know it varies state by state, but we have this, this idea of living in America that you have amazing weather, and to have an outdoor pool, you could use it every day of the year. You could use it all year round. And yeah, that is the image that we have in our heads of what it's like to live in the USA. So obviously a myth for the majority of people. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the US that do have pools. But yes, that is the stereotype. Yeah, a lot of people think that.
Whatever else you have to do to it. And most houses I've been to simply don't have one. But I will say this, I think they are slightly more prevalent in the US than they are in Britain. Some houses will have them. Some apartment complexes have them. In fact, I lived at one that did, and it was always packed, so I never went in it. I talk a lot on this channel about the sheer size of the United States, but there's also something to be said of the slender size of Britain. So growing up there, you very much got used to this idea that you could drive anywhere in the country well within a day, actually within a third of a day. Yeah. And because Britain becomes the kind of yardstick by which you see the rest of the world, you sort of assume you can do that in other countries. And for me, the United States was surely no different. So when I visited in 2004, my ex-American girlfriend probably laughed at me when I suggested we do New York, California, and the Grand Canyon in a single week. Because it is big, right? One of the shortest routes from the East Coast to the West Coast is Savannah to San Diego. It takes 36 hours by car. Now, if you were to drive this route, which seems unlikely, you might be thinking, it's only a day and a half, we'll bring DVDs. Just remember that you have to eat and sleep and go to the toilet and take pictures of yourself over something iconic. You're probably not doing this journey in less than 3 days, so that's more or less half your week gone with just that. And that's the shortest route.
Oh my gosh, so I don't know if a lot of viewers remember me saying, I say quite often that I do intend to come round to the USA. Absolutely. It's a dream. It's a dream of mine. And the best way to do it, by looking at different videos, the best way to do it is road trip. So going from state to state. But again, British brain, I look at that and I think, yeah, it's fine. You could probably drive all down the East Coast. I bet you could do that in about 12 hours. We'll make a week of it. Oh, how wrong I was. So realistically, I don't even know how long that entire East Coast, how long would that take you? Because it's one thing saying, it's 36 hours worth of driving, but then you can't drive. You shouldn't really even drive for 8 hours straight, really. That's a long drive, isn't it, guys? And it's a drive that I am not accustomed to doing, because in the UK, going from one place to another, you could probably get from one part of the country to the other part of the country, like north to south. You could probably do that in, I don't know, I'd say, if I was being generous, you'd probably do that in about 10 hours, I think. Solid driving, maybe if you had a break. I mean, in reality, I don't know. I'm making numbers up. But I'd say from here, so North Wales, northwest region of England, to get to London, you're talking about maybe a 5-hour drive. Again, it's traffic pending. There's an awful lot of things that factor into that. But we just assume that everywhere else on the planet is that much of a straightforward drive. British brain, that's what it is. So I think it's not until you understand how big each state is and how vastly huge the US is that you realize, that's not going to happen. That's going to take a long, long time.
Whatever reason, you find yourself driving from Fort Kent, Maine, all the way to Seattle, Washington. That's about 50 hours by car, and even then you have to cheat by driving through Canada.
Oh!
I am old enough to remember the 1994 World Cup, and for those of you who don't remember it, it was staged here in the United States. And at the time, I remember a lot of the narrative coming out of the British media was that the United States and its people don't care about football/soccer. But now that I live here, I've discovered that that is still sort of true, but not to the degree I thought it would be. I mean, sure, soccer is still way behind the big four, so NFL, baseball, hockey, and basketball. But whenever I've been into one of those authentic British-style pubs that you find in the United States, and there's a football match on from the Premier League, there's usually quite a lot of people in there, and I know what you're thinking. Ooh, Lawrence, that's just other English immigrants. And that is partly true, but you'll hear a lot of American accents too. And, you know, they'll be bashing the referee along with the rest of us. Not literally, we get a bit rowdy. Yeah. And here in Chicago, where you have the Chicago Fire, I often meet soccer fans proudly wearing the jersey of Manchester United. And once every 4 years, we have this little thing come around called the World Cup. And if the United States is involved in that, as they are at this one, Americans start to take an interest until they lose to England this Friday. The other thing to mention...
This is a funny one. So yeah, I just kind of assumed that I'm not a football fan. I'm not a soccer fan at all. I find it very dull, if I'm being completely honest. I find it very slow-paced, very boring, very tedious. I'm much more interested in American football because, I don't know, it seems more fast-paced. There's more things going on. It's so much more exciting, and you guys do it better. I'm sorry you do. You just do it better. So, you know, the marching bands, the cheerleaders, the mascots, everything. You just do it. It's so much bigger, and it's just, there's so much more energy, and it's so much more appealing. There's so much going on, and it's much more exciting. So again, you know, I'm speaking strictly as somebody who isn't a soccer fan, but yeah, I would have assumed that you guys, like me, maybe would be more drawn to American football because, yeah, not a lot goes on in British football, soccer. It's quite boring. The World Cup is a lot more exciting because then you've got the involvement of the other countries' teams, and then all of a sudden it makes them all play better. And it's a lot more competitive, and it's a little bit more fun, but it's still just, it's not on a scale to your American football. Yes, it's better, I suppose, when the World Cup's there, but it's still not as good. So, you know, maybe you guys can help us jazz up soccer a little bit, make it a bit more exciting.
Is that soccer is played quite widely in American schools, right? You'll just be driving down the road and you'll be like, oh, there's a goalpost in America, and they're all over the place. And this is because American girls and boys seem to play soccer all the way throughout their education and then just stop. Although some do go on to play professionally, and in the case of the women's team, routinely win the World Cup.
Hey,
and while we're on the subject of televisual feasts, that brings us on to this. Sorting...
Now, just a quick one. What I will say is that the women's soccer is much more exciting to watch than the men's. I don't know what it is. I don't know whether it's because of the involvement of like a lot of money that attracts people to the profession, but with women's football, maybe it's because there's less, because it's less popular. But the players that you get on the women's football team here, especially in England, like, they're great. They're brilliant. The women's football team they're just great to watch. Definitely stark contrast there to the men's football.
Ah, yes, that long-held belief that it is in fact Americans who are wrong with their pronunciations. But firstly, has anyone ever stopped to consider that maybe none of us are wrong? That there isn't a right way to say aluminium, there are just different ways. And secondly, I constantly get surprised while researching for this channel that American pronunciation of words or spelling of words or just the words themselves are often more in line with the word's origin. Take the word herb, for example, and watch my YouTube short about that very thing. The H, which most Americans drop, was originally silent in French. The way Americans pronounce the L's differently when they say paella is very much in line with how they do it in Spain. Well,
that's because it's a Spanish dish, so that makes sense. So yeah, you don't pronounce the double L because it's pronounced a Y. So it is paella, like it would be in Spain. That that makes sense.
British offering of paella isn't. And I could run down
I don't know why we
hundreds
say
more
paella.
examples, but that's what my YouTube shorts are for. During my life on this planet, I've definitely heard British people make the assertion that Americans are rude. And it's a weird thing because, of course, there are rude Americans.
But there are rude
you're never
British
going to get rid of
people.
those. But there are rude British people too. And
Very.
rudeness is something you pretty much find everywhere. And I have to say, at least in the Midwest, where I've lived in about 4 different cities now, I don't feel like I've encountered a higher degree of rudeness here than I did in the UK. And on the whole, just like with the UK, most people try to be polite. Actually, if anything, in the UK we have this thing among friends known as banter, in which we call each other names that if I said right now would probably get me demonetized. And you know, in my experience, that banter does spill over into rude territory because sometimes Uncle Toby doesn't know when he's gone too far. So rudeness is sort of relative, and I tend to believe that there are no higher percentage of rude Americans than any other people on earth.
Yeah. That goes without saying, doesn't it, guys? You know, there are rude British people just as much frequently as there are rude American people. And I don't think there's any difference there. I think sometimes culturally there's things maybe that each of us perceives as a little bit rude. Like, I don't know, have you heard me mentioning the whole queue thing? We love a queue in the UK. And when we go abroad, it's quite often not a problem, but, you know, an observation that we're going to queue for everything. And then when we see people not queuing, we're quite quick to get offended by it and, you know, huff. Never dare say anything, but we will huff and stand there in a very disgruntled, in a bad mood. But yes, I mean, that's not rude, but to us, that would be perceived as rude. So, you know, slight little quirky things like that, maybe, you know, I get. But outside of that, I think there's just as many rude Americans as there are rude British people, and there are plenty of rude British people.
I think instinctively we all think this about every country on earth except our own, because we know that our own country represents something of a rich tapestry of dialects. We just sort of become hyper aware of that fact and just assume that nowhere else in the world can say the same thing. And because I grew up in Britain, I was very much attuned to the fact that we had various Yorkshire dialects, Scouse, Mancunian, Geordie, Scottish dialects, Welsh dialects, Irish dialects, Cockney. Yes. But I didn't have that same awareness of American dialects. To us, there's just 3. There's general American, whatever that is. There's the dialect used by mobsters in films set in New York. And then the South. And that's about it. But it was only after I lived here for a few years that I really started to hear quite a lot of differences in the sounds that would come from various parts of just the Midwest. You got the way they speak in Chicago, which is not that is my best impersonation. You got the way they speak in Wisconsin, which I'm not even going to try to do. And then the way they speak in Indiana, which sounds closer to Southern in my opinion. And that's just the region I've lived in. You go to the East Coast, there's an absolutely mental amount of differences in the way people say words or the words themselves, especially if you're ordering a sub sandwich. Same in the South, same in the West, same in the Rockies, same in the Pacific Northwest. It's almost a poem, just without the Great Plains. The Great Plains.
So, you know, I think what it is, again, it all comes down to like the TV that we've watched. And I say TV because that's probably the most common way that we've, in the UK, familiarize ourselves with like American culture, whether that's stereotyped or not. That's probably, for the majority of Brits, that's probably the closest we get to actually interacting with American people. We don't really meet that many. So the closest we probably get is by watching American TV. Now, in a lot of TV, there's like a handful of accents that are Hollywoodized that are seen on the big screen, you know, as opposed to others. So we're familiar with the Southern accents, although to our ears they sound very, very similar. New York accent, obviously, and California, and you know, and more recently when you've got TV programs like Fargo that will take place in another part of America, we'll be more familiarized with that accent, which is quite nice. But yeah, so I suppose the main accents that we are aware of or we've heard on the TV It is through. It's cinema, isn't it? It's TV programs, it's films. So if there is like a part of the US that hasn't had an awful lot of attention media-wise through TV and film, the rest of the world aren't going to be too aware of what that accent sounds like. I think maybe that plays like a big, like, you know, that's a big factor towards that. Why would we think that Americans don't have a sense of humor? That's the next one. That's a weird one.
And finally,
Why?
I've touched on this before, you know, I think that Americans, much like Germans, often get this reputation that they don't have a sense of humour. What we actually mean when we say that is they don't have a British sense of humour.
Yes.
How dare America differ from that in any conceivable way? But they do. They even spell humour differently, which should have been our first clue. One of the chief accusations that you'll hear from the British is that Americans don't understand sarcasm. That to them, the concept of irony is reserved for the nation's industrial workers. That was a joke about iron. But this has never been my experience. Long before I moved to the United States, I recognized these very traits in the onion, both the satirical rag and the vegetable, whose comedy doesn't get enough credit for how multi-layered it is. And if you're interested in this subject and you would like a more detailed breakdown on how these differences manifest, then check out my video, 5 Ways British and American Humour is Very Different.
Ooh.
But that's it for this episode. Let me know in the comments below
next.
some of the myths that you've believed about either Britain or America. I'm Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that I don't have to. Please consider supporting Lost in the Pond on Patreon at patreon.com/LostInThePond. After all, it's down to my patrons that I'm able to bring you this week's Final Friday special. And it's usually at that very moment that I hear music.
Such a British, classic British sense of humour. Very dry. Oh, I do like Lawrence. I think he's hilarious. So yes, there's a handful of things there. I think a lot of these stereotypes are probably down to Hollywood. We're influenced by TV programs and the films. How accurate a lot of those stereotypes are is debatable. But I think that's what creates a lot of these stereotypes. And obviously some stereotypes are more harmful than others. But I think it's important to make everyone aware that these are stereotypes. Or maybe we should just travel more. That would be the best solution, wouldn't it, guys? Just all of us come over. We'll have like an exchange program going on. That'd be fun. Yes. Okay. So, oh, that video sounds like a riot. I'm gonna try that one next. So, what was it? The 5 ways in which our humor is different. Again, all of these, they are stereotyped, aren't they? They're generalized. There's so much variation from like one state to another, one region to another. So they are all generalized, but they are rather humorous, aren't they, guys? I'd love to see like an American YouTuber talk about the other way around. So like the weird, quirky things he found or she found going to the UK. That would be hilarious. I'll go and look for one of those, I think, actually. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and take care, everybody, and I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.